Hey everyone, good evening to our friends over in Australia. It's the other side of cyber. I'm James Azar.
Hello, my friends, my peeps and geeks. It's Jacqueline Jane, JJ, the other side of the world, the other side of cyber, all the things. I'm a bit dark in this room tonight, but don't fear. I am here. It is the evening, though. So, we've got to do these things. I need better lights, that's for sure. James is nice and bright, and I look like I'm in a dungeon somewhere. It's a little bit weird. Oh,
It
look,
is.
all opinions on the show are our own and don't reflect any organisation. You'd think we're going to talk about something very, very interesting.
We are, though.
We are. It is fascinating. But before we get into it, folks, remember this. Our show is all about looking at the other side of cyber. So we talk about our topic, what it is, what it means, how it might actually impact the world, and then how it actually is going to impact us as humans. So we're going to talk for a good 30 minutes on that, and then have a little verbal break and then a little time to say, okay, moving on to Q&A because we need your questions. It's really important to us to make sure that engagement is there for you so that we can answer any questions you might have. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you don't miss out. We think we got our time wires crossed today. We're blaming dolphins. It is always the dolphins' fault. Never ask, because we're perfect humans. Perfect humans. So James, tell us, what are we talking about tonight?
So we're talking about corporate surveillance and biometrics.
That's a lot. What is that?
So we talk about corporate surveillance. We've often talked about kind of the cross-pollination of your data across various social media platforms, applications, websites, shopping that people use.
Yep.
But there's something bigger than that going on, right? And that bigger piece of it is how surveillance of a human has now become so easy. We've essentially dished it up. And we've got corporate surveillance, one, as consumers, but we've got corporate surveillance also as employees. Employers monitoring stuff that we do. And now with more companies looking at biometrics, it brings up a whole new discussion. Should private companies be entitled to your biometrics? So if we don't trust government with our biometrics predominantly, should we trust companies?
Well, and this is the interesting point, because when you first said, how about this topic this week, JJ? My first thought is, yeah, okay. I just thought that's just scanning your eyes or your fingerprints and things like that. I didn't realize the depth of it. And like anything, that's not just okay to say, well, this is what I think biometrics is, so that's all there is to it. When I had a look at it, I was a little bit shocked of the elements. There's the physiological elements and the behavioral elements. I had no idea there was even behavioral elements in this. So it scared me, to be frank, because I thought, if they've got all this data on me, they've got this information, they could build this awesome profile of my habits online and what I do. And now that they can get all this other information, what does that mean? How is that going to affect me? And does a company have the right to do that?
So that's very interesting. For all of those watching us live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, we'd love to get your comments and chime in as we do this show. We try to feature as many comments as we possibly can, especially if they add value to the discussion. So be smart with your comments too. Smart comments get featured. So here's one very interesting aspect of that, which is the idea and the concept of using the surveillance of insider threats, which I think is a very, like, for those in cybersecurity, I always talk about, the intentional or unintentional insider threat, the person who clicks the link or the person who accidentally does something because they think they're doing something good, but they're really not. So what does that mean to those people, right? And because of those people, now you have companies going like, all right, I've got an insider threat problem. I'm going to initiate an insider threat program, and it's going to study how people interact with the system, and it's going to red flag weird behavior.
But so what on the flip side, excuse me, what if as an organization, I could do my education pieces on insider threats, or let's just say the clicking of the link, because most people understand that. So if there is, and we know this, that there's usually a human response. So the critical thinking elements are out the window. So cyber criminals want to get people to act on something without thinking. What if there was a way from a surveillance point of view through my camera in my computer that could identify I was having a stress response to something and stopped a massive data breach that could potentially close down an organization or shut off the power supply to a country or a city or a town or a building. I look at that and think, well, there's an argument to say maybe that is a good thing. I would rather someone be able to monitor my retina or my heartbeat. I have no issue with that personally, but it's such an interesting conundrum because it's a massive line crossing of privacy, massive, but it makes sense.
So what makes sense to you is very interesting to me, and I'll tell you why. So
Tell me why.
it doesn't matter to me if they scan my retina or listen to my heartbeat. Think of polygraph tests. So it used to be that an insider threat program used to be polygraph, right?
Actually, you're right. And they've been proven not to be
very effective.
Right.
So now imagine people's behavior online changes over time. So what does that mean? It means that as you grow older and wiser, or the latter, or the complete opposite, depending on
But we're both older and wiser, James.
We're both older and wiser at this point. So let's say you grow older and wiser, and in your journey of growing older and wiser, your behaviors change. Now there's outliers to behavior, but because technology isn't perfect, because algorithms and AI isn't perfect, right? And machine learning isn't perfect, and it's only as good as the person who wrote it. It could use really weird data sets. All of a sudden, JJ, the loyal, hardworking employee that's just gives everything she's got to the organization, is flagged as an insider threat. And all of a sudden you start to get limits because you know what? You've changed your behavior. You wake up earlier and you log into work earlier. You've started spending more time doing exploring several work applications more than ever before, right? Because you want to invest a little bit more in yourself and in your career.
You get flagged, and is that fair? Yeah.
Right. And the algorithms that are now tracking you are going red flag, JJ. Now all of a sudden your privacy is really being invaded. You're being monitored. You're being profiled based on a data set that may or may not be legitimate. Predominantly in current form, saying current form to today.
Yep.
The data sets are very, very minute. They're not accurate. They contain, I would say, a level of either bias or over. You ever over tighten a screw on something?
Yep.
It doesn't do any good. You don't need to over tighten a screw. You need to put it in so it fits perfect.
Exactly.
Over tighten the screw. So imagine that taking place. I think, that to me is the idea of what you just said, the dilemma of I don't mind someone monitoring my retina every time I go into a building, but I do. Right. And I'll tell you why I do. What are you doing with my retina information?
Well, that I do have an issue with every building I go into. I don't like that idea. If I'm at work and if I'm the guardian of data, if I am the, as we call it, the line, the last defense, the human firewall, if that is my role, and I understand that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, and whether we just take the cyber route and call it security and protection of a cyber criminal getting into my computer system of my place of work and potentially causing disaster, disruption, ransomware, whatever it is. It's just, it's not a nice effect. They're not there to make productivity better and to find some free space in disks. That's not what they're there for. So it's always nefarious. The whole point is that. So at work, I don't have an issue with understanding why they would need it, how it would be used. And yes, if there was a change in behavior of online activity, going to different folders and doing things I don't normally do, absolutely flag it. And here's the kicker. I would be wanting a policy that said, now you come and talk to me, but we won't see that. Should this occur, we won't see that. It'll be, like you said, red flag JJ. But when you have a look at what they're actually looking at from a human behavior point of view, I had no idea of these things. And there's 10 of them. I'll go through them quickly. Typing rhythm and keystroke dynamics, walking gait, voice and speech inflections, gestures, web navigation, scrolling and swiping, written text recognition like a signature or font, geolocation and IP addresses, purchasing habits, device use, and browser history and cookies. That's my behavioral elements of biometrics. I had no idea that's what it included.
So add to that your face,
Yep.
your facial recognition, or your retina,
Yep.
which is like your fingerprints, right?
Yep.
So how to me there's the idea of device security, and a lot of people say, but James, you use facial recognition to log into your iPhone. I go, yeah, but what my facial recognition does is it really just scans my face and then it scans it again to make sure I can go in.
Yep.
And it only does it once when I want to log in. Organizations that look at biometrics are looking at how often is it scanning your face? How
Exactly.
often is that camera on? What's that camera seeing while it's running?
Exactly.
How
because it
that
can
be
zoom in,
manipulated?
zoom out. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So if there were guidelines, there's always a good reason for, and there's always a positive, a yin and a yang of all of these things we talk about. And it's like road safety, take it away from cyber, go into roads. We've changed and modified how fast we drive, what we do based on the population and the type of cars that we've got. But when we look at this type of the biometrics, and as you said, your fingerprints and things like that, it's also your hand geometry, your palm print, your DNA, your blood, your facial measurements, including ear geometry, nose, head size and shape, eye distance, hair color, iris and retinas, as you said, vein patterns in your eyes and hands, and heartbeats and EKG. So you add those physiological things to the behavioral things and then say, okay, if we're going to use this from a biometric point of view for surveillance and companies are going to do this, to me, that is terrifying. All of those things together, because you have no privacy at all. At all.
Well, and imagine, so people today, let's say, switch jobs every 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say every 2 to 3 years, typically people switch a position, they go work for a different company, they advance their career. Some people do every 9 months, but we won't look at we won't use those as an actual use case for my example.
Okay.
So every 3 years, you go to a new company that's storing your biometric data. It's collecting it and storing it. And when you leave the company, what happens to your biometric data? Do they really delete it? Not really.
Yeah.
They're probably going to keep it, right? They're probably going to keep it and go, you know what? We just want to make sure that until, JJ's gone and, people have gone through all of the work she's done and that she wasn't an insider threat, we're going to keep all this data. Well, now you lead to data hoarding. Right.
And then where is the data stored? Who has access to it? And what value is it for to be sold or to be stolen?
Well, so we know what the value is of biometric data.
I don't. Tell me.
If you look at the dark web today, biometric data has significant value for nation states and very high-end threat actors for multiple reasons. One, when you look at the deep fake industry.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. Yep.
Right? That's huge for them. Number two, from an identity perspective.
Yep.
We know that printing 3D face masks are very, very common. So once I have your facial DNA, right? All your facial characteristics, and I'm able to print it with a 99.9% accuracy and put it over my head, what would that mean?
Does that mean I could open your phone as you?
You know, at DEF CON a few years ago, we were able to do that. There were other examples of different events that I've been to where, some of it we're still under NDA, so we can't really talk about it, where we've been successful doing that. But imagine going to a bank and taking a loan.
Wow.
Imagine being able to sit with a 3D mask across from someone, because thanks to COVID now, everything's gone to Zoom and online. So how many bankers today sit and open a camera and speak to their customer on camera? Right?
Yep. Or it's a photo of saying, James, I saw James over in this cafe today. Take a photo of someone who physically, looks like you and has that mask on with the right situation. It could certainly hard to prove it wasn't you.
Yeah. So you take all of that into account and you go, why is that data valuable? Well, it's valuable to someone for some reason. See, the thing about criminals and the thing about nation states is they see this data as a precursor to something later on. We know that in China, for example, right? You can't buy a thing without your face. You don't even need your phone. You walk into any store in China today, and you go to pay, and it scans your face. It goes, "Hey, here you are. Enter your 4-digit or 6-digit PIN." You enter your PIN, and that's it. That's it. You bought it. You don't need a Visa. You don't need a MasterCard. It's all Alipay. That's how it works in China. So that level of surveillance, that level of biometrics, it's scary. It's scary because what it's bringing about is this idea of, well, I don't mind it because you know what? There's some good guys that are really trying to use it for security purposes. Well, one could argue the same about guns, or one could argue the same about, motor vehicles or airplanes or anything like that. I mean, those things are very, very, very common, but they're very scary because once we go into the mindset, or once people go, well, it's not a big deal. Well, eventually it will be. And by that time, it's too late.
So the other side is, you're absolutely right. And the other side is the information that's already out there. So I just thought, well, you think about where is that type of information currently, like healthcare, the health records, your medical records have a whole lot of that information already. So the cyber criminals, they are ahead of the game in the majority of cases. They would already be targeting how to find all of this information to create that biometric spoofing, that deep fake covering all those areas, not just the deep fake videos that we're seeing, even with voice now, like we know with the boom and the massive uptake of Clubhouse, which is the social media audio app. All of that audio of our voices has been captured, and probably will be nefariously, that's twice I've said it, I love that word, captured, and used. So someone could learn to talk like me, have all of those indicators, get all the other things. There's enough videos of even these recordings now for people to be able to recreate actually anything they want to. There's enough information out there for someone to pretend to be me or to pretend to be you, not just from a identity theft perspective, but from a biometric theft perspective. That's scary.
It is. It is. Imagine it from a health insurance fraud perspective, or from a healthcare perspective. Your stolen identity. JJ lives in Adelaide, but tomorrow there's an identical JJ in Perth. Or
God, help the world. Help the world.
Or Singapore. And so,
2 JJs, geez.
So people, when the Equifax breach happened in the US, that kind of exposed the information of 149 million Americans and all their private details and all that good stuff, people said, well, what are they going to use that information for? We're going to do credit monitoring, or we're going to do all of that. I go, I'm not really worried about what they're going to do locally. Most people lock their credit. The people that don't will, go through that kind of fraud. And that's just, credit bureaus need to take that into account and be a little bit more responsible.
Yep.
Okay. But here's something very interesting. I thought, and now with biometrics, it becomes even more relevant. Sorry. So imagine in a global marketplace, all of a sudden I know so much information about JJ, and I am able to forge her passport because I've got her great biometrics. And I go to an Australian consulate in Indonesia, and I've got the JJ face mask.
Gee, that's a big seller, James. Everyone will want those.
Right. Well, you're popular, JJ. So, and now I get a passport issued by Australia.
Yeah.
That's authentic.
Because if you're providing biometric evidence and data and information and history, it's hard to deny that you're not that person.
Right. But just imagine, I lost my passport. I was in Bali on a trip, and I lost my passport, and I need my passport to get back home. They issue you a passport. But it's not really you. It's someone who has all of your details, because all of those details, they also have your biometrics. They have everything.
Yep.
So now they go about getting your passport, and then from there they travel to the UK. And in the UK, they open a company under your name. They take a bunch of bank loans. They cheat people out of money. And then they board a flight back to Indonesia as person X. Now, JJ is getting ready to go on holiday. She's boarding her Qantas flight from Adelaide to Sydney. And from Sydney, she's flying all the way to lovely London for her awesome holiday that she's so very excited about. She lands in London, heads to customs. They go, Jacqueline Jane, yes, come with me, please. And they're like, what I do? Is this VIP treatment? And all of a sudden you're in a room, and a bunch of people saying, just so you know, you're being arrested for fraud because all of that. So you go, but I haven't been here. I don't have a company in the UK. What's going on? They don't really care at that point, right? They have
no, because how do you prove you're not you?
Brilliant point.
That is the conundrum. How I've seen a couple of examples of identity theft, and how ridiculously challenging and frustrating it is for the person who's had their identity stolen to prove it wasn't them, because they're stuck in the vortex of they've got to prove who they are, even though they are that person. It is the most it just the things it does to your mind when you're trying to work it out, because we're not used to that type of thing. So when you contemplate that just as an example of one person and how that could be quite easily done, I wouldn't even know, because it's another country, jurisdictions are different. How then do we how do you have the conversation then, coming back to my original thought of, scan my eyes, I don't care, because I want to do the right thing by the organization I work for. And if that's what they need to be able to make sure we're not getting any threats from cyber criminals, it's like, well, actually, no, because you're crossing the line of privacy.
But is it really? I mean, that's the one thing about biometrics is, when people say it's probably going to secure us more than passwords, is it? Because once your biometrics are out, right? See, with a password, I can do MFA. I can add more authentication methods. But with your biometrics, I'm essentially saying I don't need anything else, because no one can be you.
Well, that's interesting.
Is.
There's something here that I read. This is from cnahardy.com. IT vulnerabilities, this is just about healthcare and technology and life science industry, provide cyber criminals with huge opportunities to steal confidential patient records, clinical trial test results, and other things. This information is more valuable to hackers than credit card details stolen via online phishing methods, because it can be used for medical fraud, identity theft, and in the case of drug development, for sale on the black market to counterfeit drug traffickers, or an industry worth an estimated $75 billion annually. And this is the kicker. Where did it say? You can easily get another credit card if you lose one or it gets stolen. You cannot replace your DNA and get another set of DNA because your DNA is your DNA. It ain't changing. So, and this is, like you said, the MFA thing. You can have control to a point where that can actually be changed, updated, deleted and replaced. You can't change your biometrics. You just can't.
And I think that's part of what I feel is the overplay of corporate surveillance. Because once your company has your details as an employee, right? How many people read the disclosures when you're hired for a job? It's like signing up for a service. You don't read the terms and conditions. You just sign the paper and you move on because you want to get paid. You want to start your new gig. No one's really looking at it any differently.
No. And look, the other side of it is also, where is this technology as far? Oh, that's it. Okay, what's this comment? What about those security questions? Like, what street you grew up on? Yep, in the 3rd grade. Maybe treat acknowledging, confirming who you are like a SYNAC function, 3-way handshake in data. Could that help? Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of those where LinkedIn user here. I just want to see who that is, if you don't mind. But yeah, I mean that could really that could work.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, but that's part of it. But I think that's the challenge is, most people. This is John Dela Cruz. So hey, John, good morning.
Morning, John.
I think John, like me, never sleeps. So.
But what happens?
That's part of the security questions, right?
Yeah.
That a lot of times when you're setting up your bank account and they go, if you ever forget your password, we're going to ask you these questions. And if you remember, and we try to be sophisticated too. So like, it's like, what was your mother's maiden name? And you write it in a way that you later forget how you wrote it, so you can't get access to it, right?
I know.
And so the SYNAC function to me is very interesting. So the synchronization and acknowledgement function, right? So to me is very, very
explain it for our people. Remember, this is the other side of cyber, and thanks, folks. We acknowledge you're here. We thank you. We've been in the vortex of conversation as usual. Make sure you subscribe. Don't miss out on any of our awesome shows, past, present, or future. We will be finishing up the podcast element in a few minutes and continuing our Q&A as we do, engaging with the people who are listening to us live. We really do appreciate you. And yes, James, continue. Talk about the SYNAC element. Go.
So think of a way where I actually identify who you are and I acknowledge it, right? So now I'm able to verify person X to table X, and now together I've got a perfect acknowledgement. That's how data is being done in that function.
So how would that work for biometrics?
So there's the challenge with that is, if it's biometrics plus all of this, how is that different from my password? See, my password I can at least change. My biometrics I can't.
Who actually would be using this, James? What organizations in our world would be at a point of actually using a complex set of biometrics as a security or a surveillance?
Many organizations are flirting with the use of biometrics in some capacity.
Do you think there's a barrier? Is there a barrier to entry here? Is it going to cost a lot of money? Is it the data storage is going to be ridiculous? Is this actually going to be a problem for me?
So I think for average user, there's two things to look at from this perspective. And John and myself were both in the military, so we're a little more biometric aware. Because when you're in the military, they take all your biometrics. They know everything about you. Hell, they can.
Yep.
They've done the 23andMe on you before 23andMe was a thing. Okay. But John brings up a very interesting kind of thing, which is, and the idea of companies trying to deploy this in a way where, how do they store biometrics? The move for biometrics is kind of being done because they say passwords are inherently false and bad. And maybe, the passwordless movement is on the rise. There's more and more companies now saying we offer passwordless account access. We do it through either over the air OTA authentication, or we do it through one-time codes and all that good stuff. And Abraham here has another great comment which says Windows Hellos is used quite heavily nowadays, or is that not considered biometrics? It is. So Windows Hello is biometrics, and it's scanning your face for access. And again, that's one of those where you go, okay, so now your biometrics are part of Active Directory and being stored probably on an Azure cloud. And just imagine that cloud being misconfigured just one time.
And see, this kind of information, and thank you, Abraham, for your comment. The biometric element, the physiological, the behavioral, the data, the passwords, all the things, no matter what we come up with, cyber criminals will find a way to break it, because they just will. So we can't stop it.
So here's the thing. That's not an argument, because here's where my argument is. Yes, cyber criminals are always going to find a way to get a leg up on practitioners. They just are. Yeah. That's what they do, right? The question is, what's my mitigation? So once someone has my biometrics, what's my mitigation? I can't change my face. Is the company going to pay me to go do plastic surgery and get my nose redone and change the distance between my eyes or make my ears a little bit smaller? Is the company going to pay that bill so that my biometrics become distinguishable?
So this is my point.
Is this actually incident?
Is this feasible? Is this actually feasible for the general human in the world going to work day to day? If you're in the military, if you're in government, if you're in ginormous corporations, maybe there is, in certain areas of a business, finance, or I'm making it up. I'm just, thinking out loud again. Is it maybe something that could happen there, but is it actually going to be something we need to deal with as a general human population anytime soon?
But yeah, because it's on the rise. People are looking at it. We're looking at AI facial recognition software being deployed to recognize crime. And we talked about this last night, so I don't want to rehash it. People can go watch Detect Town Square last night and they can rehash the criminal justice piece of it, which I think is very significant, by the way. I think the criminal justice piece is the most significant part of this. But to me, it's an employer or a company storing my data as an employee to protect the company, but you're adding an additional asset. So let me put my CISO hat on for a minute and talk about this from a CISO perspective. So I want to secure my organization, and I go, passwords is the biggest problem. Passwords leak. I can set a password policy to change every 30 days. I can enact multi-factor authentication. I can set parameters. I can block out IPs. I can do all kinds of different things today with good security controls to enable good security and access. Credential stuffing attacks still happen.
Of course.
Here's what I'm concerned about from a biometric perspective. Now I've got to take on this biometric data.
So let's call it the eye scanning and fingerprint.
Right. So now I've got to store it. That's number one. So now I've got to collect and store this data.
Yep.
I've got to write a policy for this data. I've got to consult HR and legal about this policy and this data.
Train the people.
Then have to invest more money in securing this data. Right? That's just the beginning of it.
And then there's the education element for the end user to understand why this is occurring and what it means to them.
So most of biometrics, let's say, your iPhone or your Android, your Samsung, right? The way their facial biometrics work on them when you log in is it's safe to the device. It's not anywhere else.
No.
So device loss, erase the device, your biometrics data are erased. You get a new phone, you got to set up your facial ID all over again.
Correct.
Right? That's because it's saved on the device. Here, when we look at like Abraham's comment here about Windows Hello is cloud-based. So you got to have a webcam and you've got to have a live internet connection to get access to that data. Right? So now I'm making sure that the only way you can get access to stuff is if you've got a live internet connection. Then let's say you're on an intercontinental flight. You've got 15 hours of work, but now you don't have internet for 9. You can't work, can't access anything. So productivity goes down. That's one downside to it. Now let's say Windows Hello says I'm going to download an offline version of it. So now you've got an offline version on a device, and I've got to secure the offline version on the device so the device knows to recognize you.
And this is my point, James. We can't, as a population, get our shit together with passwords. So how the hell are we going to be able to manage biometric surveillance? It is, and maybe it's just that cynic in me. I'm very rarely cynical, but to be absolutely honest, I cannot see this being implemented, because if 59% of people are still putting their bloody birthdays in their passwords, we want to take people to a biometric world? Come on.
So
like,
I did an unofficial official survey on LinkedIn, right? And I asked this question. I said, how comfortable would you be if your company required you to have biometrics to gain access to anything? The overwhelming majority, 2-1, were against it. Here's a very interesting point to that, though. The people who were for it, you'd be surprised, were all the cyber people. They were like, well, I see this. And I'm like, it's like the same people who talk about, maybe gun control. So if you've been a victim of a gun crime, you're closer to, so you go, we need gun control. But if you're far away from it, you go, no, you don't. You don't need it.
Exactly.
Why would you need something like that? And
this is the biggest frustration that I face. And it's not a negative. It's a frustration it can be overcome. Everything is situational. In the world of cyber, if you talk to people who understand and who don't, what's 59 and the 41% who aren't using their birthday in their password are probably InfoSec related people, or people who have become aware of not putting your birthday in your password. So those are the people who would answer, I have no problem with that. But the other guys, can you imagine what would happen if we're having these issues with passwords and credential stuffing? It'd be, retina stuffing. It'd be all of that kind of stuff. People would be asked to log into things that aren't actually real, and then they'd be able to capture all their data. And you can't replace that. If someone gets my retina scan, like you say, I can't get another one. They're going to use it. I just can't see it happening. I look in government in some areas, yes, granted, I can see it happening.
Right, but those are air gap networks. I think where government.
Hold on. What's an air gap network?
So an air gap network is a network that isn't connected to the outside internet.
Okay.
It's internal. So there's a server in the same place. That server has all the information. That server is in a highly secured room.
Yeah.
Right? That server doesn't communicate with the outside world. It's only communicating to the one system in that office that requires their biometrics. So when government uses biometrics, it's used in an air-gapped environment. Most governments do that. The Chinese do it, the Americans, the Australians, the Brits, the Israelis. It's pretty much all in air-gapped networks because they understand that value.
So the interesting, this will occur in situations across the world for different reasons, some good, some bad, because that's the world, because it's full of humans, and that's just what happens. But for the other side of cyber, our focus is on the human element and how that's going to affect people, because the last thing that either of us want is to scare anyone to think this is around the corner. From a general point of view, like we look at COVID right now, and we look at the QR code scanning of apps for seeing where you're going, what you're doing, so to track where you are. QR codes have been around for a very long time. I'm still surprised they weren't used more, but this is one use case that's come forward. Of course, you can still find a way as a cyber criminal to screw that up quite easily. However, that technology was pretty much, the uptake was very high because Humans have their mobile devices all the time. They're used to it. They're used to scanning things. They understand it. So that's why the uptake was there. If this came out when QR codes actually came out many years ago in the early 2000s, there's no way people would have used it because they didn't have the technology. And I see that a similar thing with the biometric element of that surveillance. Yes, it might be used. It might be out for a long time, but I don't think, I would say 10 or 20 years until it's going to be used mainstream as a form of security for the majority of people. I just cannot see it happening.
So we see it in China now, and in China, biometrics have now brought up the social credit score system. So
how does that work? Explain that for people who.
So the Chinese social credit system is your biometrics are being observed on everything you do. And so every bad thing you do lowers your social credit score. So I don't want to be friends with someone with a low social credit score because some restaurants may not give that person service because he's got a. So imagine you walk into a restaurant, they scan your face and they go, "Thanks so much for coming, James, but your credit score, your social credit score is too low and we can't serve you."
Wow. I've just got something here because Google is my friend today. Sorry, James. China's social credit system, by its wide definition, is a set of databases and initiatives that monitor and assess the trustworthiness of individuals, companies, and government entities. Each entry, I suppose human or company, is given a social credit score with reward for those who have high rating and punishment for those with low scores.
Yeah. And Abraham brings out the point that some people can't even travel with bad social scores. Yeah, they can't even leave their home state in China with a bad social score. So that's how you get obedience, right?
But I've never heard of this until today. I've never heard of that until today.
Yeah, I mean, you should look up. There's been a bunch of documentaries that have been done around the China social credit score system and their biometric surveillance systems that the government there employs. Remember that the moment we give this up to government or to corporates, it's done. There's no wheeling this back. John, you love JJ's cynical perspective. First, I have to stop using passwords like insert your pet's name 1 2 3 4.
Password exclamation point.
I love it. Or people who write password with money signs and a zero instead of, and think they're. No way someone can crack that. And you're like, have you looked at the top 10 most common used passwords? That's one of them.
Or welcome 1, welcome 2, welcome 3, welcome 4.
I don't know if you remember when it used to be QWERTY.
Yep. Well, that's the thing is.
ERTY 1 2 3 4.
If you go and have a look at the last 10 years and longer, but just have a look at the last 10 years most popular passwords, they have not changed. People's behaviors have not changed. And that's my point. I mean, I'm very rarely cynical. You know that, James. It's just not in me. I'm very optimistic, but when you think about it and you've spoken about it and I've read a little bit today, it's like, it just doesn't make sense to me. People aren't going to know what to do.
Well, and I think part of that is you look at these biometrics and imagine the camera's on your face 24/7, right? And
no.
and it's watching everything you do. And now your company's watching everything you do. And just for the sake of humor here, you pick your nose 32 times a day.
Yeah.
You're
burping, farting.
And all of a sudden JJ's a nose picker. Right.
Yeah,
Abraham brings up the great docu on social score by Vice. And
thank you, Abraham.
Link on the CyberHub podcast LinkedIn page where you can go and get it there under the other side of cyber.
I will do that because I think this type of thing is very informative. And I base nearly everything I do on that awareness. Bring awareness in. It is not about necessarily it's right, it's wrong. Bring awareness so that people know what can be done with this type of information. I remember a flippant comment I made as I travelled back from RSA year before. What year are we in? Was it 2019, James? We were there?
No, 2020.
2020. All right. So 2020 RSA, traveling back literally on that tail end of COVID-19. And as I was talking to some colleagues in one of the airport lounges, I said, we're going to have a health on our passport. There's going to be a health passport. this thing's going to be huge. We're going to have an element in our passport, which if we can't get that formally done, we're not going to be able to travel anywhere. And they're talking about it. Of course they are. I mean,
Pfizer ruled it out. So Pfizer ruled out that any travel passports would be effective against COVID.
Is that the nature of how it's transmitted and time frames?
And the development of a disease, right? So what is COVID? COVID's essentially a flu. It's what it is. It's part of the flu strain. That's why we're able to develop a vaccine so fast. Yep. Is because we kind of used traditional existing technology to deal with this. We just tested, different doses of this on the disease to see what would happen. I agree with you. Travel passports, biometrics. It's funny because at the airport they'll tell you, if you want to cut the line, just download our app, upload your biometrics, and you don't have to stand in that long line of people waiting to speak to someone. You can just cut the line and go directly to the machine.
But what about the positive side of biometrics? So it just dawned on me then. What if that type of information could be checked against some health concerns? So they could say, actually, JJ, we've just had a look at, your data, and we're doing our scans because it's part of the service we provide of having all your data, and we can see you've got the, early indicators of Parkinson's, for example. What if that type of stuff could be used from a positive? So here's the optimism. See, I'll bring in the cynicism and a bit of optimism. What are the positive sides of biometrics? Are there any?
So there could be some, right?
I can't help myself. I'm trying to find the good things about biometrics.
So let's, there could be some. There could be some positive arguments to be made around biometrics. You could say that, at least it makes sure that you are as who you say you are, and in the good cases, it really does protect you and all that good stuff. And then it's a weight of, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And that's a personal decision for a person, an organization, and a population to make.
But data is currency, and this biometrics is extra pieces of data, extra elements. It's currency, and that is what we are trading in these days. So it's very valuable because you can't replace it. You can't update it and get another set.
Yeah, I think from the other side of it, from a diagnostic side of it, right? The technology to diagnose diseases based on biometrics doesn't exist. And we saw that with telemedicine, right? During COVID, when doctors wouldn't see patients because of COVID, right?
Yeah.
They would, I had COVID twice, and twice I did telemedicine, and twice I'd open my camera. The doctor would look at me and be like, get close with your eyes. Let me see that. Put in your oximeter. Show me what your oximeter does, right? All that kind of stuff. And I'm like,
Actually, Abraham, very interesting comment there. Pop that one up, James. 7-Eleven Australia has deployed facial recognition technology to all 700 stores nationwide as part of a customer feedback capture mechanism. By entering the store, you consent to facial recognition. Yes, and didn't one of our supermarkets as well, whether it be Coles or Woolworths, did the same thing? That's biometric stuff.
Right. And now they're collecting your biometric data, and they know what aisles you walk down. They know everything. They're able to see how much time you spend in their stores. To me, that's a gross. To me, that's a gross invasion of privacy.
I just thought JJ picks her nose 32 times in a day, and she's buying giant Slurpees from the 7-Eleven 4 days a week. And you just imagine what my biometric file would look like. They'd be like, "Oh my god!"
So imagine 7-Eleven in California doing this, right? So wow. Here comes Mark, and it's 10 p.m. and Mark is stoned. We can tell by his eyes. His eyes are bloodshot.
Yeah, because we captured that in the camera.
Chili cheese Doritos and a bunch of energy drinks and whatnot. The question is, with all that data, what can it do? And I think it'll do more harm than good.
I agree. I'm going to stick with my cynicism. There's no optimism here, and I find this is very interesting. I did not join the dots between, because there has been a lot of media about the facial recognition at the self-serve checkouts, I think it was Coles or Woolworths. I don't want to say one, not the other, but one of our big supermarket chains who aren't sponsoring us today. That there was a big uproar about it. I did not think for a moment, oh, that's biometric surveillance. In my brain, that was facial recognition. And it's the same thing, but my brain didn't connect those dots.
It is. It absolutely is.
Wow. Abraham, thank you. You're a genius. You have just made my brain do some more weird stuff and have ideas about other things. Wow.
Well,
it's been a good show, James.
It has been. We're 5 minutes over time. The show's scheduled for 45 minutes, and we have gone 5 minutes over. So,
awesome.
Thank you so much for watching. This show is live every single Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
It's 9 p.m. Sydney time.
Yes, exactly. We got it wrong.
7 a.m. Eastern time in the U.S.
Yep.
Or it's noon GMT in Europe.
Oh, my God. Everyone, no excuses. Everyone has to be here.
Yeah. I don't understand. I don't understand any of you folks. I don't know. All right. Anyways, that's it for us here, folks. Thank you so much for watching today's
Thanks,
show.
guys.
We appreciate it. Be well and be safe. And I'll be on in about another 40 minutes. You guys will get another thing of me going live for the practitioner brief. So
don't miss it. The practitioner brief is awesome. I don't know how you do that, James. It's a bloody awesome service.
It's a really fun show I like to do. Awesome. All right, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.